Chapter 1. 2020 AD Mount Everest. There was a tearing roar in the distance. A huge layer of ice slid down from the dark mountain peak and fell into the surging sea. The violent ice sea surged, surging for thousands of feet as if it would continue to the end of the world. Then, a wind blew from the end of the world, mixed with the smell of ashes and dust. The world suddenly became so narrow. The towering sky seemed to be pressing down, turning into pure white iron. Through the huge cracks above, one could see the gradually dimming stars in the universe. They were like lamps that had melted into the darkness after losing power. There seemed to be nothing left in the vast world. In the end, only the highest, narrow platform in the world and the temporary work cabin were left. A fishing rod was set up from the edge of the platform, and the fishing line was thrown into the sea. The buoy bobbed in the turbid water. The bored fisherman wore a felt hat and lay on his folding chair. As if to kill time, he even brought an old chessboard, ignoring the loud cracking sounds in the distance, and casually played with the chess pieces on it. As if a long time had passed, the chess pieces of the black and white sides were difficult to gather. The only remaining king and bishop were also incomplete and full of cracks under the weathering of time. Even the chessboard was missing a large corner. The black and white squares were twisted and mixed together, forming a large patch of chaotic gray. However, what was surprising was that no matter how much the ground shook, those chess pieces still stood firmly on their own territory without the slightest movement. President, NASA sent a message. An assistant wearing thick glasses walked out of the cabin, carrying the last of the luggage. The fourth settlement has been completed. The New York Stock Exchange has finished uploading. They are leaving and wish us success. They should have left long ago. The president shook his head unhappily. Those guys in the Directorate of Command are so troublesome. They are always dawdling and can't even move fast. We have to keep a backup. After heaven fell, we can only rely on hard drives to transfer data. Don't be silly, child. The president snorted. Those guys just like to enjoy the feeling of stepping on the bell, as if they are professional punctuality. Tisk, 10 minutes early won't kill anyone. Ah! The assistant smiled awkwardly and didn't say anything else. When he moved closer, he saw the computer beside the chessboard. Apart from the 2 pages of How to Fish in the Himalayas, there was only a real-time satellite image on the screen. The satellite from the old NASA was still tenaciously maintaining its mission. It meticulously transmitted the images from space back to Earth. Unfortunately, what appeared on the screen was no longer the beautiful stars of the past. Instead, it was riddled with holes. Countless chaotic cyclones covered the entire azure sky. Beneath the thick and thin layers of typhoon clouds were patches of horrifying burns. At the same time, a huge crack slowly appeared on the defensive star map. A line of crimson spread over thousands of kilometers and rapidly expanded, pulling at the surrounding yellowed continents and dark gray oceans, before stirring up a hurricane and tearing another hole in the atmosphere. Is that an earthquake? The assistant sighed in amazement and leaned over. Amazing. I didn't expect it to be so spectacular. The president looked up and immediately understood. It's a geothermal eruption. After the core began to cool, the third wave of earthquakes is being released from the continental plates of North America and South America. If left alone, it will end in about 60 years. Look, New York has sunk into the sea. What a pity. I haven't seen the Statue of Liberty yet. I've been there. The president retracted his gaze. Actually, it's not that interesting. There was a sudden roar in the distance, and something seemed to light up in the depths of the ocean. The crimson light tumbled in the darkness, reflecting the painful burning light under the Earth's crust. A faint wind blew from the end of the sea, wrapped in gray dust and white fog, as if covering the entire world. It was as if the whole world was boiling with seawater. "It's really like teppanyaki," the president suddenly said. Teppanyaki, didn't I take you to eat it last time? It's delicious." The president seemed to be sleepy. He lay on the chair and covered his face with his hat, as if he was about to sleep. His voice was soft, as if he was sleep-talking. "In the past, a friend in Ingzhou told me that teppanyaki is actually divided into two types, kendong and kanchi. Most people usually eat the kendong type, which is convenient and simple, but the kanchi type is the most delicious. This is because they only apply a thin layer of oil on the iron plate at the beginning. As long as the temperature is high enough, the oil of the ingredients will cook themselves. It is said that this is the only way to taste the natural freshness and taste of the ingredients." The assistant was silent for a moment. "That sounds cruel." "Yes, but aren't humans such cruel creatures?" The president asked back. "If eating is the only way to survive, then eating is the simplest reason. It's the evil that is rooted in human nature. In the beginning, they devoured thunder and fire, burned the wilderness, dug coal mines, and then extracted oil. When there was insufficient oil, they coveted fission. Since then, even if the world is about to die, they will not relent. Long before our ancestors put the Neanderthals into their diet, they were already out of control." The assistant turned around and looked at the man on the recliner, but he couldn't see the man's face through the hat. He couldn't tell if the man's eyes were filled with compassion or the mockery and ridicule he was familiar with. Chapter 2. Name: Why Sure. Age: 17. 17. The interviewer raised his eyebrows and looked at the young man in front of the table. The thin young man who was carrying the heavy violin case quickly showed a fawning smile. He was wearing a rather old suit, and his face was rather pale, like he had not seen the sun for a long time. His hair was slightly messy, but his pair of dark eyes seemed to be illuminated by candles. They were so bright that it was scary. Gothic style. That's rare. Quite a number of people these days are interested in that style. The man in charge of the interview mumbled inexplicably. He scrutinized the young man and said in a serious tone, "Xiao Huai, you have to know that our club is an elite club. Not just any Tom, Dick, or Harry can join us. Elite, elite. I understand." Huai sure straightened his small body and nodded heavily. "Before I came here, Lao Yong told me that your club has strict requirements. Don't worry, I have plenty of experience." Then he squeezed out a smile that could be called flattery. Even though the requirements were strict, the pay was high. Recently, many people in Xianhai had lost their jobs. God knew how difficult it was for a poor student to find a part-time job playing the violin. Huai Shi was so poor that he was about to die. When he heard from the intermediary, Lao Yang, that he had found a lucrative job for him, he was so happy that he almost went crazy. If he really let this job slip through his fingers, he would be struck by lightning. Before he came, he heard from Lao Yang that this was a members-only club for the rich. Just the waiters and waitresses could get a few thousand RMB in tips. If he could play the violin here, he would definitely be able to earn some money. As if surprised by his inexplicable sincerity, the interviewer was also taken aback. He nodded slightly. "Okay, the interview form says that you know how to play the cello. Perform one. Don't be too bad. Don't worry about that." Huai Shi confidently sat down and opened the zither case. He hugged the cello and picked up the bow. After thinking for a moment, the unique, low melody of the cello flowed out from the strings. He might be afraid of other things, but when it came to the cello, he had never been afraid. He had received so many awards since he was young. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't afford to hire a famous teacher, he might have already made an appearance at an international competition. This was a song that had been practiced countless times. Even if it was placed in front of a professional judge, they wouldn't be able to pick out any mistakes. Once he started to play the zither, his mood immediately calmed down, and his performance was even better than usual. The deep melancholy between the lively notes was simply on the verge of bursting out. After a few minutes, the interviewer waved his hand in annoyance. "All right, let's stop here." Huaisha raised his head in shock. "Wait." Suddenly, someone called him from behind. It was a man in a suit. His face was handsome and cold, and his eyes were full of harshness. "Hey, you, stop." "Me?" Huaisha was a little flustered. He couldn't help but lean back a little under the man's gaze. "You're the newcomer today. You didn't even greet the big brother of the club before leaving. Don't you know the rules?" The man walked in front of him, stood on the steps, and looked at him condescendingly. He nodded. "Your face is not bad, but you'd better behave. In terms of beauty, you can't compare to me." As he spoke, he coquettishly raised his hand to comb a few strands of his long blonde hair, which made Huaisha feel sick of it. She replied angrily, "Sorry, big brother, I don't want to be a gigolo." "Oh, now you're called a male escort. It's all the same." The big brother nodded and generously waved his hand. "It's okay. Since you call me big brother, then I'll take care of you in the future." With that, he took out a bottle from his handbag and stuffed it into Huaisha's arms. He patted his shoulder earnestly. "You have to be professional even if you're a gigolo. When you go back, wash the oil off my face. Your skincare is too rough. It's a pity for your small face. Use it sparingly. This is a high-end product from Europe." With that, he didn't wait for Huaisha to thank him. He lifted his chin and turned to leave. Huaisha stood at the door, dumbfounded. He looked down at the cosmetics in his hand. He didn't know if he should throw this thing at the door and shout something like, 30 years on the surface, 30 years at the bottom of the river. Don't bully a poor young man. After a long time, he looked at the delicate little bottle and stuffed it into his arms with a toothache. "Forget it. It's already here, and it looks quite expensive. It's a pity to throw it away. I haven't opened it yet. I'll ask Lao Yang to sell it later. Poverty makes me humble. Why am I so poor when I have a golden finger?" He took out the notebook in his backpack and flipped it over and over. He sighed and stuffed it back into his pocket. Thinking of Lao Yang, he couldn't help but grit his teeth. He took out his phone and dialed a number. He cursed. "Lao Yang, are you F***king crazy? You're introducing me to an interview to be a gigolo. You're crazy about the intermediary fee, aren't you?" "Hey, I didn't ask clearly. They want young, experienced, good-looking, and talented people. I thought you were so poor. Isn't it for your sake? Don't be angry. How about I treat you to a meal the day after tomorrow to celebrate your sister-in-law's recent discharge? Remember to bring some chives over. Bring your ass. Do you want to eat or not?" Huaisha hung up the phone angrily. This bastard must have done it on purpose. He was counting on the intermediary fee he gave him after he accidentally got on the pirate ship. But when he thought of Lao Yang's family situation, he couldn't hate him. In order to raise money for his wife's medical expenses, this bastard was practically desperate to earn money. Otherwise, he wouldn't even do a part-time business like Huaisha just for the commission of a few dozen yuan. Moreover, other than the fact that the intermediary fee was not discounted, this guy was quite generous. He didn't use any excuses to cheat him of his money. They were brothers in the same boat. Forget it, forget it. Huaisha sighed and heard the sound of thunder. Above the gloomy sky, dark clouds floated in from afar. Under the dim sunlight, corals could be vaguely seen growing between the clouds, and the shadows of fish swimming. The slightly blue ocean gently swayed, sprinkling a ripple of light to the earth. It was going to rain. It was said that 70 or 80 years ago, this kind of coral cloud was rare. At that time, they were still in the sea, not floating in the sky. Many scientists said that it was the discovery of some rare element or the cause of atmospheric pollution, but not many people believed it. In the beginning, everyone was panicking, thinking that the end of the world was coming. But after waiting for a few decades, they didn't see the classic apocalyptic species, like zombies. After a long time, everyone got used to it. It was just something floating in the sky. It was nothing more than a little rain. Even if the plane changed its route, wouldn't it still continue to fly? Money had to be earned, debts had to be paid, and life had to go on as usual. After a few days of chaos, everything returned to normal. It seemed to be no different from the previous days. Thunder rumbled. Huaisher didn't bring an umbrella, so he didn't dare to waste time. He turned around and ran home. Just as he was running, he heard a loud noise from afar. This time, the thunder was particularly clear, and even the earth trembled. He looked up in the direction of the sound and saw a cloud of smoke and fire rising from the dock in the distance. It seemed that something had exploded. The pedestrians on the street looked at each other with a blank expression. Some people excitedly took out their phones to take pictures, and some people excitedly moved closer to see what was happening. If it was in the past, Huaisher might have gone to see something strange, but now he felt that his spine was about to be crushed by the double burden of life and being a prostitute. So what if it was fun? Let's forget about it. He sighed, turned left into the alley, and sped up. Bang! At the end of the alley, a bottle was kicked to the wall, and the glass was scattered all over the ground. Then it was stepped on by a leather boot. Someone rushed out from the corner. As if drunk, he staggered and didn't even slow down. He brushed past Huaisher, and his whole body was plastered to the wall. Huaisher was stunned. What kind of hero was this? But he didn't expect that the hero would stagger back from the collision. After seeing Huaisher, he suddenly pounced on him. Huaisher couldn't dodge in time and was grabbed by the wrist. Then he felt a heavy box being stuffed into his arms. What the hell? He was stunned and instinctively wanted to pull his hand away, but he felt that his hand was wet. Sticky red liquid flowed out from the man's sleeve. It was blood. Until now, the thick smell of blood that couldn't be dispersed rushed to his face. Huaisher suddenly felt an intense dizziness and headache. She bent over and involuntarily vomited a mouthful of saliva. When he looked up, he finally saw the man's ferocious face and twisted facial features. He looked at Huaisher in shock. He seemed to want to say something, but he opened his mouth and spat out a big mouthful of blood. The scene was obviously so strange, but Huaisher accidentally saw that in the pool of blood he spat out on the ground, there was a small goldfish. It wasn't even big. It was the kind of goldfish that people kept in fish tanks for ornamental purposes. It looked fat and very cute. Brother, you have such a strong appetite. Can this be eaten? It's still raw. Huaisher was dumbfounded. Did you eat something bad? But then he saw the goldfish that was flopping in the pool of blood quickly shrivel up. In the end, it turned into a gray thing and melted in the blood. With the death of the goldfish, the man seemed to have lost all his strength. He fell to the ground and stopped breathing. Only thick blood seeped out from under the trench coat. In the silence, only Huaisher was left in the alley. And the box that was stuffed into his hand, the box looked bigger than an ordinary Rubik's Cube. It was heavy in his hand. When he shook it, it seemed to be filled with liquid. It had a cool texture that was unique to iron and copper, and the surface was engraved with beautiful totems that Huaisher had never seen before. However, these totems were covered by that person's sticky blood, so she couldn't see them clearly, but they seemed to have incredible magical power. Huaisher swallowed his saliva. He felt thirsty, just holding it in his hand. He couldn't help but want to open it. It was as if there was something inside that was incomparably tempting to him, making him want to possess and obtain it. He took a deep breath. Under such circumstances, was there even a need to think about what to choose? Huaisher took out his phone without hesitation. Hello? 110? Chapter 3. Name: Huaisher. Age: 17. In the police station, Huaisher, who was taking down his statement, felt that the conversation was too familiar. Had it been repeated several times somewhere? Fearing that there would be an accident after taking down the statement, he held the policeman's hand and asked repeatedly, "You don't hire prostitutes here, do you?" The policeman's face twitched, but he didn't want to pay attention to him. He poured him a cup of tea and said that he could leave after the inspection. Huaisher sat on the chair and sighed with lingering fear. Alley, dead person, little goldfish, iron box. With so many strange elements piled up together, even Huaisher, who had experienced ups and downs in his life, couldn't wrap his head around it. But the only thing he was sure of was that this was definitely not normal. Thinking about the explosion at the port just now, he was afraid that it was an internal fight among drug dealers. What if there were 2 ounces of pure white flour in the box? It would be fun if he was caught by the police. Although he was so poor that he couldn't afford to eat, there was no need for him to go to the prison to find a buffet, right? In this case, as a citizen of the Republic of Dongsha, no, as a person with a little bit of common sense, he should have called the police, right? Yes, you did a good job. In this kind of situation, the most rational thing to do is to ask the police for help. In the evidence room, the policeman who returned his things nodded in agreement. If it wasn't powder but a bomb, the situation would be even worse. But what was in the box? Huaisher asked curiously. I don't know. I've looked for an X-ray and did an explosive detection. There shouldn't be anything dangerous inside, but it looks like an antique. As for what it is, we'll wait for the experts to come tomorrow to open it. But there's nothing for you to do here. Go home first. As he spoke, he put the basket in front of Huaisher. Because it was a death case, all of Huaisher's belongings were taken apart and checked. After getting it, Huaisher immediately took out the thick notebook that he had carried with him for several years and checked it. It hadn't been touched by anyone. The police officer in the evidence room couldn't help but laugh. What's wrong? Are you afraid that we will read your diary? Young people still keep diaries nowadays. Ha! Don't worry. I didn't read it. Huaisher smiled awkwardly and stuffed the notes into his pocket. When he picked up his phone, he accidentally saw the bank balance message. His heart ached again. After repeatedly confirming with the police that there was no reward for such a report, he walked out of the door in pain, feeling the world was bleak. As he walked on the road with his head drooped, the streetlights cast a long shadow behind him. A crow flapped its wings and rose from the swaying shadows. Boom! Thunder flashed in the night sky. But then he heard a roar, and the dark clouds that were sprinkling endless rain and lightning suddenly shook, bursting with the sharp sound of tearing steel. Just above the Stone Marrow Museum, a huge hole was suddenly torn in the clouds. Then a blazing electric whip came down, like a descending divine punishment, and blasted the railing in front of Huaisher, completely smashing the old railing into pieces. In the pungent smell of electrolysis in the air, debris flew everywhere, and Huaisher collapsed to the ground. Oh, my God, is it that effective? He rolled and crawled back into the house, mustering the courage to poke his head out before closing the window and shouting, I won't defy the heavens, brother. I was just joking. Smack! The window closed. Huaisher sat on the chair on the verge of tears, and he couldn't help but want to howl at the sky again. There was no way to continue living like this. his bank account had fallen to 3 digits, and he had almost accidentally applied for a job at a brothel when he wanted to find a job. He had encountered a bizarre death when he wanted to go home, and he had been warned by lightning when he came back to defy the heavens. The only thing he could do now was to count on his stupid netizens to bring some joy to his painful life. Huaishir turned on his phone with a glimmer of hope, and then saw that someone in the class's WeChat group had posted a photo of him standing at a brothel. A group of people were vigorously odding him, and there were even people named Beast and Slave shouting, "Congratulations to President Hui for making your debut as the center of the world of brothel. Do you want the girls in class to jointly send you a wreath? Get lost. I don't like girls. I like baldies with soft skin like you two." After Huaishir finished replying, he turned off his phone and couldn't help but cover his face. All right, now the news that he had almost become a brothel had spread all over the world. What was the most depressing thing in the world? It wasn't the loss of a good reputation after 10 years, but the loss of a good reputation before you had even done anything beastly. What a loss! Why was it like this? With such a big house and a golden finger, there should have been 2 types of joy overlapping with each other. These 2 types of joy should have brought more and more joy. He should have been able to enjoy the blissful time of his life. But why? Boom. Before Huaishir could finish speaking, another thunderclap came from outside the window. Even through the window, it gave him a fright. He didn't dare to let his imagination run wild anymore, and could only take out the thick notebook from his bag with tears in his eyes. Can't you work harder? Look at other people's gold fingers. They can add points, give missions, and even turn into girls. Why do you only know how to write a diary? That's right, this thing was his gold finger. Ever since he picked up this thing, when he was 9 years old and had a high fever, he knew that this thing was no ordinary thing. He kept it safe, and when he grew a little older, he dreamed every day that he would hear a mysterious voice in his ear saying, "Super XX system has been loaded." Then he would be able to make a name for himself, become a Buddha, and turn his life into a novel. He would be able to count money until he burned hundreds of money counters. He would be famous until he died, and then he would be able to turn into a girl and enter the card pool. In the end, he still hadn't found out what this lousy thing was for. It looked like a lousy notebook. It couldn't be torn, burned, or soaked. The only thing that seemed impressive was that it would automatically write a diary every day, updating in real time what he was doing at every moment. It was as if it was saying, "I'll write down all the silly things you did when you were in your 2nd year of middle school and show you in the future." He lifted the thick cover, and the silhouette of the crow on the title page was still striking. Huaishir directly flipped to the end and reviewed his fantasy life today. When he saw the description of himself coming out of the police station, he was stunned. Among the swaying shadows, it seemed like a crow flapped its wings and rose. After Huaishir finished reading, he couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect this lousy thing to be able to describe the atmosphere. In the future, let me copy a few paragraphs to write some fantasy novel. I can cheat some money. Of course, this embarrassing sentence was also recorded mercilessly. Huaishir sighed and continued to flip to the back. However, he didn't expect that the back of the notebook, which was supposed to be blank paper, had an extra thick page at the back. Then, behind the page, there were a few strange files. It looked like a resume from somewhere, and there was even a 2-inch bareheaded photo attached. Most of them had big heads and thick arms. There was a burly man who could beat up several of Huaishir's men. Among them, there were a few young ladies with snake-like faces that he had never seen before. There was also a bald, prematurely aged middle-aged face that he seemed to have seen in the local news. Chunbo, Wang Quan, Mu Jing, Lu Bai. Those strange files were increasing rapidly, and when it finally stopped, there were more than 70 of them. What the hell? Huaisher looked at the notebook in his hand in astonishment. He pinched his chin and muttered, "Could it be that it was activated by a lightning strike?" He pushed open the window, put the notebook on the balcony, and shouted to the sky, "How many more times do you want to try?" God ignored him, and didn't even bother to throw another dog at him. In the awkward silence, only the updated record on the page recorded the stupid thing he had just done. Ahem, let's pretend that nothing happened. Huaisher sighed, took the notebook back, and threw it on the table. Forget about it if he couldn't figure out what was going on. He still had to continue looking for a job tomorrow. Let's go to sleep first. Everything can happen in dreams. He threw himself on the bed and closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he saw a hunched figure standing under the dim light of the street lamp. It was half squatting like an ape. When it raised its head to look at him, it revealed a ferocious mask. The next moment, he was dead. Chapter 4. Huaisher screamed as she woke up from her bed and saw the mess in her bedroom. It was a nightmare, but the tragic death in the nightmare was so vivid that his neck still felt the phantom pain of being torn apart. He touched his neck with lingering fear and felt cold sweat, but he was very sleepy. After drinking a mouthful of water, he lay back on the bed and closed his eyes. In a trance, he seemed to have become a security guard on the night shift. He took the time to walk out to smoke in front of the door when he heard footsteps in the corridor. In the darkness, someone was gradually approaching. When he put out the cigarette and was about to turn around to ask something, he saw a hideous mask stained with blood. Fierce Ape grinned and smiled. In the next moment, he was dead again. Huaisher screamed again as she jumped out of bed. She saw the mess in her bedroom and the dust on the ceiling that had been shaken by her screams. He panted violently and touched his stomach. It was a nightmare again. This time, his stomach was directly dug out from the bottom up, and then his neck was pulled out. Damn it, I'm seeing a ghost. He panted for a long time and lay on the bed. He wanted to stay up all night, but he didn't expect that he would fall asleep again. This time, he became a fat man who had just finished his fun and was about to go home. He washed his hands, sang, and was about to change his clothes when he saw blood seeping in from under the door. The footsteps in the pool of blood gradually approached. Someone pushed the door open. Then he died again. Damn it, I'm seeing a ghost. Huaisher opened his eyes angrily, wrapped himself in the quilt, and turned over. I don't believe it. He closed his eyes, and then he had a nightmare for the whole night. It was not until dawn that he finally returned to normal and fell into a deep sleep. Before he fainted, he vaguely saw that in the deepest part of the shadows of the dream, there was a blood-red eye quietly staring at him. At 3:00 in the morning, Ai Qing heard the sound of the phone downstairs. Soon, the sound of the phone stopped abruptly. Not long after, someone knocked on the door. Miss, it's a sea level alarm. Ai Qing sighed. Help me change. A woman in a tight suit came in and helped her up from the bed. She helped her change out of her pajamas and then put her underwear on her naked white body. The thin girl was helped up and stood in front of the mirror, supporting herself with a walking stick. Which one are you wearing today? The black one you bought a few days ago, right? It'll go with the long skirt. Remember to bring a blanket. All right. 15 minutes later, Ai Qing, who was sitting in a wheelchair, was pushed into a car by a lady holding an umbrella. In the pouring rain, the car drove all the way. Finally, they showed their ID outside the barrier and drove all the way to the scene. Huaisher lay on the table with tears in his eyes. I'll confess everything. But can you at least tell me what I did? I'm a good citizen, really a good citizen. Yesterday, I saw a murder scene and even called the police. You can't accuse me. Behind the one-sided mirror, Ai Qing watched the whole process expressionlessly. It was only when the middle-aged man in charge became impatient and waved his hand for the punishment that she spoke. If it really involves relics from the border, even if you torture him, I'm afraid he won't say anything. Besides, can't you tell whether he's telling the truth or not? But we only have this one clue. The middle-aged man was also helpless. Then what should we do? AI Ching shook her head, took out her phone, and opened her contact list. Finally, she found a number. Although there aren't many locally registered ascendants, there are many who are willing to maintain cooperation with the authorities. However, due to the delay in your internal process, the case has occurred. Astronomy will not bear the employment costs. You understand? I understand. The middle-aged man sighed. It's only the middle of the year. There's still more than half of the budget left. I'll double it to you, okay? The call went through. AI Ching asked straightforwardly. Special Affairs Division. 15 minutes, okay? Soon, the call was hung up. 15 minutes later, someone was brought in by the guards. It was obviously not his first time here. He greeted AI Ching familiarly. Ms. AI, long time no see. Why don't you come over to my place? It's too dirty. AI Ching stuffed a file over expressionlessly. She pointed at the young man behind the one-sided mirror, who was lying on the table shouting that he wanted to expose something on Weibo. Let him talk. Can you do it? It's a piece of cake. The newcomer grinned, flipped his hair, and pushed the door open. But when he saw Weischer's face, he was stunned. Weischer was also dumbfounded. Wait, why are you here? He looked at the male prostitute at the door, who had once taught him to know the rules, and shouted angrily, I understand now. You're all in this together. And you said you don't hire male prostitutes here. I just didn't sell my body. Do you have to do this? In the awkward silence, only the young man's angry roar could be heard. You're forcing me into prostitution. Chapter 5. Behind the one-way mirror, in the awkward silence, the Special Affairs Division's people couldn't help but reach for the guns at their waists. They wanted to kill this embarrassing thing before the news spread. Only AI Ching remained calm. She only took a sip of her coffee, then took out a pair of heavy sunglasses from the pocket of her wheelchair and put it on her face. Continue, she said. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then sighed and ordered through the microphone on the table, Continue. After a long time, Mr. Kingpin finally reacted from the awkward encounter. He brushed his hair back, smiled warmly, and reached out his hand. Little brother, let's get to know each other. My name is Yu Dongri, T. Who the hell wants to know you? Weischer was furious. Now that he finally reacted, he pointed at Yu Dongri with his handcuffed hand and shouted towards the door, Comrade leader, I want to report this person for engaging in illegal activities. He's the leader of the male prostitutes. Don't be fooled by him. Yu Dongri sighed helplessly. He suddenly raised a finger and placed it in front of Weischer. Look at my finger. No matter how stupid Weischer was, he knew that something was wrong. How could he be willing to jump into his trap? He raised his head and accidentally saw his face, his fair skin and slender neck, a pair of eyes as deep as the ocean, and a few strands of golden hair hidden in his long hair that looked like twinkling stars in the universe. A few strands of hair fell between his eyebrows, covering his eyes that were as cold as the stars in a winter night. His tall and straight nose showed the masculine beauty of a man. Oh, Weischer was stunned for a moment, but he didn't know why, but he suddenly felt nauseous. He secretly blamed himself. How could he look at someone who was better looking than him, so ugly? His pale face squeezed out a smile with difficulty, but the delicious water leaked out from the corner of his mouth. In an instant, his entire being was dumbfounded. He held Yu Dongri's little hand and rubbed it without loosening his grip. He said familiarly, Big brother, where do you work? Oh, I'm really sorry for being so rude last time. Let me introduce myself. I'm Huaishur, 17 this year. Do you still remember me? At this moment, not only Huaishur, but everyone who saw Yu Dongri behind the one-way mirror couldn't help but gasp. Even the middle-aged man, who had always been the most serious, blushed. His heart skipped a beat, and he turned his head away and coughed softly. Only Ai Ching, who was wearing large sunglasses, was still drinking her coffee calmly. She reached out and pressed the call button. I didn't call you here to let you go crazy. Restrain your soul radiation. Let's get down to business. All right. Yu Dongri raised his finger and pushed the black-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. The person beside him passed him a stomach medicine and a glass of warm water. It was the female driver who had been silently following behind Ai Ching. Thank you. He forced a smile and ate the medicine. After panting for a long time, he finally calmed down a little. How is it? Ai Ching said. I told you, you can't get anything out of him. Maybe he's pretending. The middle-aged man coughed dryly. I know about Yu Dongri's soul ability. It's a charm effect, right? Although it's effective on ordinary people, ascendants might not fall for it. How can Yu Dongri not know whether he fell for it or not? Moreover, if there's a man who's at the most exuberant stage of self-esteem and desire, who can pretend to this extent, I think you won't be able to get anything out of him, no matter what you think. Ai Ching looked at him deeply. Give up. I've looked at the file. If we're talking about the suspicion of that brat, I'm actually his alibi. Yu Dongri walked in from the interrogation room. He threw the file full of notes back on the table and sighed helplessly. That brat was still at our club 3 minutes before the explosion at the harbor. Interview? What can he interview for? To be a gigolo. I think he was tricked by an intermediary, right? He only found out halfway through the interview and was scared away by the supervisor. Yu Dongri shook his head. He looked at Huaishur's frontal photo in the file and sighed. If you ask me, he has quite the potential. He has a good air about him, but it's a pity he doesn't wear it well. If he changes into a slim-fit suit and removes that shameless smile on his face, he'll be a living example of abstinence. Old aunties love this kind of little hedgehog that can't be eaten. Enough! I didn't call you here to make a career plan for him. Ai Ching interrupted him. He's just an ordinary person who was accidentally involved in the incident. Let him go after signing the confidentiality agreement. It's a waste of time to stay. It was decided. 15 minutes later, Huaishur, whose soul was ravaged, was stuffed into the car and sent away after signing a lot of documents. In front of the gate, Yu Dongri put his hands in his pockets and looked at the struggling young man who thought he was going to be shot. He couldn't help but laugh. By the way, what's his name? He looked at Ai Ching behind him. Huaishur. You know him? Yu Dongri smiled mysteriously. That's why you helped him get away with it, right? Don't underestimate the intuition of a gigolo, Miss Ai. Unexpectedly, Ai Ching's expression was still calm. I guess I know him. Very close. Not really. I'm 3 years older than him. When we were young, we played pretty well. Yu Dongri turned around in surprise. He never thought that the two had such a relationship. What happened later? Later, Ai Ching glanced at him. Later, his family went bankrupt because of my grandfather's breach of trust. We haven't seen each other since then. Yu Dongri was stunned and didn't know what to say. In the enclosed basement, someone pushed the door open and entered. The restless man jumped up from the chair and looked anxious. Why are you so late? Do you think that no one noticed last night? The blood-stained ape squatted on the chair and chuckled. Thanks to you, I had a good time. Where's the thing? The man anxiously stretched out his hand. Did you get the thing back? A blood-soaked plastic bag was thrown into his arms. It's back to the owner. But the man was overjoyed at first, but the moment he took the bag, his face changed. He tore the bag open crazily, took out the black iron box, and opened it carefully. But it was empty inside. Where's the thing? He screamed. Where's the origin substance inside? Where's the origin substance that I've collected from hurting for so long? Looking at the ape in front of him, his eyes became fierce. It's you? You didn't think that I could absorb nearly 1,000 origin substances, did you? The ape scratched the mottled white hair behind the mask and asked, If I had that ability, I would have become one of the High Lords a long time ago. How could I be ordered around by you? When I got it, it was empty. Instead of threatening me, why don't you think about how to explain it to the High Lords first? Because you privately used the sacred item for profit. You lost the origin substance that you've collected from hurting for 12 years. You got your share of the money too. The man lost his composure and roared, staring at the ape. If something happens, don't think that you'll get better. The ape didn't say anything. It just silently rubbed its fingers together, its iron nails clashing against each other, producing a sharp sound until the man's gaze shifted away from its body. There was a traitor among your own subordinates, which caused the sacred item to fall into someone else's hands. I took back the sacred item for the High Lords, so I have my own merits. Even if I made a mistake, it's not enough to incur excommunication. The ape said coldly, If I were you, I would definitely think of a way to make up for it. Isn't it just lost? Wouldn't it be fine as long as you find it before the High Lords find out? That's easy for you to say. The man angrily glared at it. How could it be that simple? Aren't those old men and women about to die? Might as well use the trash. That way, at least you can recover some of your losses, the ape said casually. As for the origin substance that was worth 1,000 people, it definitely wouldn't have disappeared without a trace. Whether it's used to advance, prolong life, or trade, it all needs time. A few minutes later, a gloomy voice came from the secret room. Investigate. Who else touched this box? However, if you confuse me with the kingdom of heaven, that would be too funny. After saying something that Huaishur couldn't understand, she suddenly changed the topic and stared at Huaishur with her red eyes. However, this has nothing to do with who I am. The problem is, do you really think that I was tricking you? She asked softly. Didn't you personally experience the records of those people before they died? Huaishur thought about the nightmare he had last night and subconsciously shivered. His voice became hoarse. Are they really all dead? That's right. Crow nodded. Apart from you, everyone who has seen that box is already dead. There really is a lot of good stuff inside. After sleeping for so many years, it's rare to be able to replenish so much origin substance. Although it's a bit messy, it should be enough for 800 or 900 people, right? She smacked her lips and looked at Huaishur happily. For the sake of those greeting gifts, do you need my help, young man? 40 grams of copper, 57 grams of silver, 12 grams of tin powder, a set of crucibles and gas burners, and the rest of the lead is free. In the evening, Huaishur, who had been running around the city all day, finally returned home. He threw the plastic bag in his hand on the table and picked up the leftover mineral water he drank the day before. He didn't care if it was healthy or not. My money has been emptied and I'm in debt. What's the use of buying these things? Alchemy, of course. Crow picked her feathers and calmly said, It's not easy to create a sacred mark that ordinary people like you can use. Sacred mark? Huaishur laughed. Do you want me to be a cleaner in the air? What is this? A joke of modern people? No, it's just a trick used by trashy game developers to cheat money. Thinking about the few students in his class who were red-eyed from spending money, easily spending 50 to 30 to 40,000, Huaisher felt envious. It's not the same Huaisher, although the name is the same. The sacred mark I'm talking about is not that kind of ridiculous thing. Crow calmly explained. If the essence of the soul possessed by the ascended is the embryonic form of the divine, right, then the sacred mark is the result of analyzing the legacy of the gods. By tracing back the traces of the miracle to find the way to the divine, imitating the gods, investigating the authority of the gods, and the remaining traces of the gods, the research results are the existence of the sacred mark. Using a secret instrument composed of metal and incense, imitating a huge miracle to create a small miracle. This is the sacred mark. God. Huaisher was stunned. Are there really gods in this world? There used to be. Crow was silent for a moment. But they're all dead. The things abandoned by the times are nothing to worry about in today's world. I'm afraid that soon they won't even be worth remembering. In this regard, Crow didn't want to say more. He just urged Huaisher to set up the crucible and start the refining as soon as possible. Is it enough to just use these? When the temperature of the flame was enough, Huaisher followed Crow's instructions. He put on a mask and ground the lead into powder. He mixed it with his own blood and carefully wrote inscriptions that he didn't know at all on the thin metal. The structure of the inscriptions was very simple, but there was no room for error. Crow's eyes were terrible. Even if there was a slight deviation, he had to erase and rewrite it. After wasting a lot of blood, he finally finished this simple job. These are just auxiliary materials. Even the simplest sacred mark is not a result that can be smelted by mortal fire and mortal metal. Now, it's just the most simple emergency materials. In the future, when you want to make more advanced sacred marks, you'll need the blood of phantom beasts and a lot of sacrifices. Even he paused for a moment and didn't say anything else. He just said lightly, "Rest for 10 minutes. We'll start again at 11:15. Remember, you only have one chance. If you miss it, I don't think you have enough money to start again, right?" When money was mentioned, Huaisher suddenly became more and more nervous. He held the notes in his hand and repeatedly confirmed the order that Crow had dictated to him. He practiced it in his mind. Crow, on the other hand, stood next to the crucible and stared at the flame. In the blink of an eye, the crimson flame suddenly turned pure white. In the end, countless streams of light appeared, magnificent and gorgeous. But Crow's figure was becoming more and more faint. What is that? Origin substance. Origin substance that has been ignited. Crow glanced at him and didn't wait for him to ask again. He explained, "Origin substance is the substance that makes up the soul, the spirit that is stored in the substance. You can think of it as the fragments of the soul. You don't have enough materials, so you can only work on the flame. Now, you have to burn a person's soul every second. Don't worry about the source. These are all from that box." Huaisher swallowed his saliva, not knowing what to say. What was even more terrifying than burning a person every second was that, according to Crow, there were thousands of origin substances inside the box. What kind of damned thing was this? Don't think too much about it. It's starting, Huaisher. Crow glanced at Huaisher one last time. The liquid lead in the crucible was already boiling, but there was no stench or other odor. Instead, under the torment of the pure white flames, a faint trace of gold could be seen. It was as if there were golden dust floating in the middle of a light gray. Huaisher didn't have time to think too much about it. He grabbed the items that he had arranged in order and threw them into the crucible one by one. First was tin, then copper, and finally silver. Every time he threw them in, the liquid metal in the crucible didn't ripple at all. In an instant, the foreign objects were completely melted. The pure white flames suddenly rose, and countless rays of light were greedily sucked into the crucible. The intense light stung Huaishi's eyes. At the last moment, Huaishi heard Crow sigh. "I hope I made the right bet this time. Huaishi." As she murmured softly, she, who was already as thin as a phantom, suddenly spread her wings, flapped them, and flew into the crucible. Boom! With a muffled sound, the flames were extinguished. The liquid in the crucible rose up, forming a complicated outline in the air. In the end, it collapsed inwards layer by layer. Under Huaishi's stunned gaze, it gradually solidified and floated down from the sky. It was a feather, a metallic feather. The feather seemed to be made of pure silver. Every fork on it was slender and perfect, without any flaws. Light flowed across the mirror-like membrane, as if it was reflecting the entire world. All kinds of strange scenes constantly flashed by. The feather fell into Huaishi's hand. "This is my current body, a special type of sacred mark of the indefinite system, branches of events." Crow's voice sounded in his ear, full of exhaustion. "With that notebook and branches of events, even before the upheaval, you are qualified to be a registrar." Huaishi stared blankly at the thick notebook in her hand that was flipping through the pages without any wind. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. It was clearly a flowing handwriting, but she felt as if she was looking at herself in a mirror. Another hymn that only existed in written records. What is this thing? Well, if you want to say, it's probably the last remnant of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Crow sighed softly. You can call it the Book of Destiny. At that moment, countless flowing words suddenly gathered together. As the crow on the title page disappeared without a trace, new lines of words appeared. Huaishi, stress period, title, none sacred mark, none miracle mark, none skills, general knowledge LV3, art, performance, cello LV6, death premonition LV0. Look, the current you is the master that it acknowledges. Crow said tiredly, you can figure out the specific usage later. I'm going to sleep for a while. Wait a minute, what the hell is death premonition? Why is it so vague? Huaishi put his face on the title page. Only then did he see the almost indistinct line of words. It's the premonition of death. No matter what it is, after experiencing dozens of deaths in a row, there will be some experience, right? Indistinct and dim means that it has been learned, but not to the extent of being called a skill. But I didn't expect that there would be a LV6 cello performance. This guy might really be a genius. The voice gradually drifted away, and in the end, its voice could no longer be heard. It might really have fallen asleep. Only the dumbfounded Huaishi held the pen and book, not knowing what to do with it. Holding the quill known as branching matter, the corresponding operations and applications naturally appeared in his mind. Apart from manipulating some text-type objects, the greatest function of the quill was that it could write in the air and freely change colors. That's good. At least I can save on printing fees when I send out random ads in the future. Huaishi looked at the quill with a wry smile and finally looked at the book in his hand. After he carefully flipped through it, he found that there seemed to be no changes in it. Only in the files that appeared at the end, there were a few that faintly glowed. Huaishi hesitated for a long time, raised the quill, and pointed at them. In an instant, the page shone brightly. The light engulfed him. Chapter 7. Under the scorching sun. He was sweating profusely. When Huaishi came back to his senses, he was standing on the field. Behind him, there was a constant chuckle. He seemed to be doing some radio gymnastics with the guy opposite him. Before he could react, a kick came from behind. A brawny man in a singlet pointed at him and scolded, "Chunbo, you coward! Didn't you eat?" After that, he pushed his opponent to the side and got into a fighting stance. Come, let's spar. Huaisher looked over his shoulder and saw the slogan on the wall behind him. Sweat more in normal times and bleed less in wartime. Before he could react, his body seemed to move. He rushed straight at the brawny man in front of him. No, the instructor. Bang! A fist closed the door. Huaisher's vision went black, and he was in severe pain. Again, the instructor hooked his finger at Chenbo. Only now did he realize that he seemed to be in a strange state of possession, like a spirit behind his back. He passively felt the feedback of this body. It was as if he was in a dream, but the pain was the only thing that was real, and there was no reduction in the slightest. Bang! Huaisher felt as if her face had been smashed into the ground after another trip and a joint grab. Again. Bang. Again. Bang. The scene was constantly changing. In those fragmented dream fragments, he seemed to be repeating the process of being abused by several instructors. They seemed to be specifically targeting the unlucky guy he had possessed. His movements were not standard. Another round of violent beating. Another round of violent beating if his reaction was slow. Another round of violent beating when he was about to eat. Another round of violent beating when he was just training. Beating Chenbo when he was eating and sleeping. There was even a nightmarish experience of having sex with a group of naked, muscular men in the dormitory under the smell of body odor and feet. Huaisher had completely given up hope. When Chenbo was able to use military boxing to fight 2 rounds with the instructors and turn from a rookie to a slightly bigger rookie, he was expelled because he fought with a member of society during police training. He became a new member of society. It was really worth celebrating. Huaisher was about to cry. He finally didn't have to be beaten. What the hell was this? Could it be that he had accidentally obtained some sort of super beaten-up system? What happened next was simply indescribable. In the fragmented nightmare, Huaisher's identity kept changing from an unlucky student who was brutally beaten by the instructor with military boxing to a gangster who carried a knife and fought with others on a hot day, to a guard who squatted in front of the door to see if there was an officer coming to crack down on illegal activities, to a pimp who entertained guests every night, and finally a bald middle-aged man who was in a meeting. This grandson really likes to attend meetings. Study sessions, seminars, inspection meetings, reports. They were simply putting their limited energy into endless meetings. The fragments continued to merge together like a dangerous building. When it reached its limit, it collapsed and turned into thousands of fragments again. Huaisher's consciousness was also pulled apart. Hundreds of thousands of himself were in parallel in hundreds of thousands of nightmares, constantly circulating. It was like a 150 yuan computer that overrated itself and loaded the task load of the Milky Way computer. In the end, the violently operating brain seemed to have a flame from the friction of the inside of the skull, burning everything to ashes. All the nightmares were suddenly shattered. Huaisher opened his eyes and panted violently. Sweat dripped from his face, slid down the armrest of the chair, and fell on the wet floor. The clock on the wall was still slowly turning. It had only been 5 minutes since he closed his eyes. He had already been beaten up 80 to 90 times, fought dozens of times, and was sent to the hospital several times. He had been out for hundreds of days, and had sent little girls who wore very little to pink rooms thousands of times. He had attended countless meetings. It was simply a series of social experiences. It's really hell, Huaisher murmured sluggishly. He couldn't support his body and slid down from the chair. In a daze, he closed his eyes. Just let me die. For a moment, he seemed to see his tragic future, and made this wish from the bottom of his heart. Then, it became the same as all the wishes Huaisher had made before. There was no possibility of it being realized. When he opened his eyes, it was already the morning of the next day. He was still lying on the floor, but He felt a lot more comfortable, as if he had taken some kind of elixir. Soon, he saw the 4-needle in his hands. Yes, a bottle of saline and a bottle of glucose. You're awake? A crow's head suddenly popped out from the side and congratulated him with joy. We have cured your disease of seeing everyone as a pigeon. Then I really have to thank you. A doctor has the heart of a parent. Don't worry about it. The crow flapped its wings, flew to the edge of the table, and sat down with its legs crossed. One of its wings rolled up a cigarette of unknown origin, skillfully lit it, and smoked in a very sociable manner. But the smoke that it swallowed dissipated from under its feathers, which looked very strange. How is it? Did you get anything? The crow asked. Does being able to wake up alive count? Whysher got up from the ground grumpily, but he didn't dare to pull out the 4-needle, so he could only carefully lean against the chair and sit down. Only then did he realize that he was no longer the same person as before. He was now a man with a status panel. Immediately, he opened the Book of Destiny and looked at his own data on the title page. Ignoring the inexplicable stress period and the empty stigmata and miracles column, below it was a simple and easy-to-understand skill column. General studies, which represented general knowledge and education, was still an extremely embarrassing level 3. Before he graduated from high school, he had already returned part of his knowledge to his physical education teacher. And the art column that represented his cello skills was level 6, which he was slightly proud of. He had already reached the professional level. If he wanted to level it up, he would have to rely on 99% of his sweat and that crucial 1% of his talent. And the inexplicable skill death premonition was still gray. It felt more and more like a strange game. Don't tell me I have to pay for it. Whysher was faintly worried. After using it last night, Whysher finally had a preliminary understanding of its classification. According to the rules of the Book of Destiny, only skills that could be mastered and used at what would be recognized as skills. And the limit that an ordinary person could reach through a lifetime of learning and constant practice was level 10, which was level 10. Usually, the first few levels of a skill were relatively easy, but just like the settings made by black-hearted game developers, the higher the level, the more effort it would take to increase it by a few hundred times. And for some people, level 10 was already the end, but for others, it might just be the starting point. Whysher was well aware of this. It was like 2 test papers with full marks. Sometimes level didn't mean anything. It was just a convenience that the Book of Destiny used to make it easier for him to measure himself. While feeling that there was still a long way to go, Whysher continued to look down. Only then did he realize that he had gained a few new skills overnight. Combat, basic military boxing, LV4. Reconnaissance, LV4. There was also a somewhat funny, illegal group management, LV4. Then, what the F***CK? Crow exclaimed, how come your copywriting skill is already LV6? Whysher couldn't help but roll his eyes. Nonsense. Try holding hundreds of meetings in a row and then writing hundreds of meeting notes and learning experiences. Whysher didn't have a deep understanding of military boxing. He could only learn it by passively taking a beating and watching from the sidelines. It was only when he was writing these hundreds of notes and learning experiences that he would truly shed tears of blood and bitterness with every word. His biggest gain this night wasn't learning how to practice military boxing or watch the police. It was learning how to make up the word count in his manuscript. Now, he had even surpassed his master. He could fill in the entire Pacific Ocean in his update without leaving a trace. Moreover, he could accurately divide it into 3,000 words to avoid losing out if he wrote too much. You can write this paragraph down properly. Although she didn't smile, her eyes were full of mockery. But do you really want to know? Sorry, I don't want to know at all. Yu Dongri's expression twitched, and he extinguished the last bit of probing. This woman is really terrible. I want to. In Huaishi's house, the youth nodded in response to Crow's question and answered without hesitation. Do you desire to have a soul? Most people would hesitate when faced with this kind of sudden question and demon-like temptation, but he didn't even pause for a moment. After experiencing the strange events of the past few days and understanding his own situation, he became a bit more courageous. If he couldn't pass this level, he would die anyway, so what was there to be afraid of? Although he didn't know what a soul was, this didn't stop Huaishi from desiring one. Not only that, he also desired money, power, and children. But then again, shouldn't everyone have a soul? Crow asked back. In fairy tales, everyone has a happy ending. Do you really believe that? She was a bit unhappy that she didn't get to enjoy the tangled-up scene that she had anticipated. Even her explanation became less and less enthusiastic. The difference between a normal person and an ascended person is the existence of a soul. In the current era, there exists a creation called the Silver Sea. No, it should be said that it's a natural source of energy. It's also known as a perpetual motion machine and is one of the sources that created this enormous world. And its true core is the Silver Sea formed by the projection of all human origin substances. It's said that the formless sea is unimaginably vast, and all human intelligence is just a branch that flowed out from it, stepping onto the path of ascension, allowing one's iron and stone nature to pass through the Silver Sea and ascend to a golden soul. This is the original goal of alchemy. Only in this way can people possess a soul and be crowned with the title of ascended person. Otherwise, one's cognition and consciousness can only be carried by the strands of sparks in the synapses of the brain, unable to deal with the darkness and storms outside of the present realm. You keep talking about the present realm and the borders. Is there another world? Huaishi interrupted. From a certain point of view, yes, and not just one, but tens of thousands. The crow laughed eerily. However, this is not something you should be concerned about right now. You should think about how to awaken your soul first. Huaishi could only listen attentively. Currently, the Astronomy Association is in charge of guarding the Silver Sea. Based on the precipitation rate of all human origin substances, there will be about 300 to 400 spots every year. But this isn't your turn. Before it comes out, it will be divided up by the various branches of the administration. The list is scheduled until 10 years later. In reality, most ascended people don't rely on the Astronomy Association's special permission, but rather on their own to awaken. This is the path you need to take. Huaishi swallowed and nodded seriously. And then, for others, this process is naturally extremely difficult. For a modern person to leave the city and seek survival in the wilderness is even more dangerous. It's like taking a rocket with very little reserves and flying out of the atmosphere. Not only do you have to break free from the pull of the Silver Sea, but you also have to face all kinds of accidents and challenges. No one knows what awaits you. If you want to succeed, you can't lack strength and luck, but even if you have both, it can't be said to be perfect. Not only do you need an abundance of origin substances, but you also need a bit of luck. Often, it's like winning the lottery, difficult to replicate. Fortunately, there are so many people, so there will always be one or two who succeed. Then what about the ones who fail? Huaishi asked. Crow seemed to smile, but didn't say anything. Huaishi felt a chill in his heart. But don't worry, you don't need to worry about this problem. She raised her wings and patted Huaishi on the shoulder. You're blessed by the heavens, young man. With the Book of Destiny in your hands, you have the path to the heavens under your feet. Others are like Icarus, but you're like a ladder. You're very stable. Then, what do I have to do? It's very simple. Crow said, You just have to go and kill people. If you do it yourself, the Book of Destiny's records will definitely be more specific, right? Not only that, if you kill one, you'll be able to obtain that person's skill. If you kill 10, you'll become a fully deserving genius. As long as you have it, the more people you kill, why sure, the stronger you'll become. She whispered into the youth's ear. Aren't there so many people who look down on you? You must hate them to death in your heart, right? Not only your classmates and teachers, but also your parents who abandoned you. This world hasn't been good to you, so why treat it with kindness? Huaishir was stunned. Ah, you're really scared, aren't you? For a moment, Crow felt joy, but when Huaishir raised his head, she saw a trace of surprise in his eyes. Really? Huaishir didn't dare to believe it. You just have to kill people? Then let's start with Li Wuyang. Huaishir said with a finger, who told him to always show off his good father and good uncle to me. The rich are heartless. Damn it. There's also that woman who's flirting with him. The two of them have probably been together for a long time. The English teacher is the third, always making sarcastic remarks about me in class. Oh, right. There's also that damn fatty who thinks I stole his money. His brother isn't a good person either, always getting into fights at school. Chapter 9. Crow was silent. It shouldn't be like this, right? Huaishir murmured softly. I know that not everyone should like me. I may be unsociable and not very popular, but maybe sometimes some people's actions need some punishment, but none of them should die. They are all living people, just like me. They don't deserve to die, just like those people in the club don't deserve to die. Even if they may be guilty, they are innocent. So, I don't like what you said. Huaishir looked into her eyes and emphasized every word. I don't like it very, very much. Aya, why are you so fierce? Crow turned her head away and seemed to be sobbing sadly. Big sister, I'm doing this for your own good. Besides, my whole bird is now yours. Before we start working together, can't you test me a little? As she said that, she blinked her teary eyes. For the sake of Big Sister's sincerity, can you give me a chance to mend the pen after the sheep is lost? If Plan A doesn't work, we still have Plan B. Unfortunately, a crow acting like this was not cute at all. What Plan B? It's very simple. Crow looked at him one last time. Since you don't want to kill others, she said, then I can only kill you. At that moment, Huaishir's vision turned black. Huaishir had a long dream. In the dream, he seemed to have just finished work and was about to go home. As he waited for the subway, he seemed to despise a certain useless employee who was fired during the day. Then, the roar of the subway came from the depths of the tunnel. Before he could put away his phone, he heard a resentful voice behind him. Go to hell! The next moment, a pair of hands pushed his back. He fell. He flew up. He fell down again, towards the tracks. The lights of the subway became brighter and brighter, closer and closer. Then, Huaishir was crushed into pieces. The last thing he heard was the crisp sound of his skull breaking. An indescribable pain came. But before he could scream or feel fear, his consciousness quickly blurred. Then, he seemed to have become a business tycoon who dominated the global economy. Now, he was cornered and trapped in a park. His assistant, who had betrayed him, sent him a final ultimatum to surrender. Huaishir smiled coldly and raised his pistol. Bang! A soft sound came from the helicopter in the distance. Huaishir could no longer feel his body. At the last moment, he heard his assistant shouting blankly, "Don't shoot, he's not." A headshot. In his dizziness, Huaishir did not have time to react. Like a series of nightmares, he suddenly turned into a middle-aged man, wearing a strange power armor and carrying a gun. He rushed into the Louvre Museum and fought with a group of strange insectoid creatures. And then he quickly died. This time, his last thought was, F***CK, I want to load. Load? What file? Load your REM. He began to laugh at himself, but soon he could not laugh because he seemed to be hanging on the city gate again. As time flowed on, the arc slowly grew larger and larger, gradually becoming a perfect circle. However, the final gap couldn't be closed no matter how hard she tried. It's still a bit off. The crow muttered in astonishment. Normally speaking, the emergency period was when a person's innate nature broke free from the silver sea, and the origin substance became independent, gradually returning to their consciousness. During this process, a ascended person's unique soul would be forged. This period was usually very short and was different from the structure of the soul. The shortest record in history was only 5 minutes and 12 seconds, while the longest time was only 5 or 6 months. Even the crow had never seen a person who hadn't passed the emergency period after 6 or 7 years. Even if he had been in a state of empty mana for a long time because of the Book of Destiny, wasn't this a bit too exaggerated? Originally, she had thought that with the impact of the deaths recorded in the Book of Destiny, Huaishir would be able to smoothly break through the bottleneck in a few minutes. However, she hadn't expected that this guy was already standing at the door, but he just wouldn't go in. The forging of the soul was just a bit off. Just a bit. What exactly is it that's missing? The crow couldn't help but narrow her eyes. She had overlooked something important in the end. This feeling was very unpleasant, but no matter how much she thought about it, she couldn't understand why. The existence of the soul was the sublimation of one's innate nature and consciousness, and it contained the essence of human nature. It was because everyone was different that there were so many different souls in the world. There could only be one reason why the construction process had come to a standstill. Huaishir himself. But even if she wanted to search for Huaishir's records, she could only read up to the time after Huaishir had picked up the Book of Destiny, when he was 10 years old. After that, there was only a blank space. But through the description between the lines, she could clearly see that Huaishir was trying to hide something. But she couldn't tell what it was. Huaishir wouldn't say anything, so this could only remain an eternal secret. Just as the crow was deep in thought, the incomplete circle began to change once again. Black ink began to appear, and as the arc changed, it formed the outline of a waning moon. It's actually the phase of the moon. The crow was stunned for a moment before she sighed with emotion. How rare! Although the construction of the soul wasn't complete, its attributes had already appeared. In the classification of the Book of Destiny, the phase of the moon corresponded to a person's origin substance, which was the soul itself. Most of the soul's abilities under the phase of the moon were related to interference with the soul, such as mind control, consciousness modification, and spiritual recovery. This branch was a strange and mysterious symbol for most people who had ascended. Unfortunately, the scope is too small. The crow shook her head with slight disdain. Too small. Relying on strangeness and fear might allow one to achieve a certain level of success, but the true center of the world's stage would never be left to those who only knew how to hide in the dark. After an unknown amount of time, Huaishir's breathing became heavy. His eyelids fluttered, as if he was about to wake up from a dream. She sighed, and the branch of the matter slowly rose, gently touching the center of the full moon, leaving behind a bit of ink. The crow's color became paler and paler. I've given you a chance. Huaishir, she whispered. She murmured softly, it's up to you whether or not you can build a bridge from illusion to reality. It's done. The confidant rushed into the office excitedly, holding a portable hard drive in his hand. Master! From the moment that Bastard Chen Quan snatched the box, all the surveillance footage along the way are here. Are your hands and feet clean? The man called Master seemed to have not slept for a long time. His eyes were red, and when he raised his head, his bloodshot eyes looked extremely ferocious. The confidant trembled subconsciously and squeezed out a smile. Don't worry. I found someone else to do it and didn't leave our names. Even if someone tracks it down, they'll at most find it on him. Very good. The master took the hard drive and didn't say anything else. He paced back and forth in the office. After a long time, he finally made up his mind and stomped his feet. Go and inform those old men and women that there will be mass on the weekend night. Tell them all to come. Those who don't come don't have to come in the future. The confidant was stunned for a moment. Wasn't it held the day before yesterday? They're used to coming at the end of the month. Then can't you just find an excuse? The master was furious and glared at his face. Do I have to help you think of an excuse? Can't it be the Heavenly Father's birthday? Okay. Whatever you say. The confidant didn't dare to be unlucky again. He covered his head and fled. In the quiet office, the slightly prematurely aged middle-aged man was silent for a long time. He closed the door and paced for a long time before plugging in the hard drive and began to read the fragmented information on it. The person in the warehouse suddenly pulled out a gun and killed someone, took the holy object, and then was injured in the counterattack. The explosion happened, and he fled all the way. Finally, he got into a small alley. As the timeline moved forward quickly, the young man with the piano case walked into the box. Soon, he walked out of it, and the picture froze again. His gaze stopped on that slightly immature face. It's you. The master leaned closer to the screen, his scarlet eyes staring at the young man in the picture. Chapter 10. I'm suffering. In the desolate backyard, Weischer sat on the steps of the garden, looking up at the sky and sighing as he stared blankly at the ground. At this moment, he deeply felt that he was a child with a bitter life. He was tricked by an agent into going to a brothel for an interview, and on the way home, he encountered corpses. He was mysteriously thrown into a police station because of a box, and not even a day after he was released, he was thrown into another police station. Now, in order to survive, he had no choice but to accept the help of a crow. However, this crow's greatest ability was to make him die again and again. In the end, it was all for nothing. Since he was going to die, couldn't he just die once? Why did he have to die dozens of times? He died to the point where he was almost numb. Death premonition, an unprecedented skill, was about to take shape. Weischer felt that if he was lucky enough to survive this time, he could rely on death to raise this skill to LV10 for the rest of his life. If you have time to complain, you might as well die more. This kind of meditation can at least train your origin substance. Who knows, you might be able to break through the 99% progress bar and become an ascender. Beside him, the crow, who had zebra-striped for some reason due to lack of ink, suggested, "As if I believe you." Weischer completely ignored her. He stared at the desolate garden and began to think, who am I? Where am I? There's only half a month before school starts. I'm so poor that I'm about to die. What am I doing other than seeking death? Suddenly, he raised his eyebrows, and an idea came to his mind. I say, do you have any way to make money? I do. The zebra crow carelessly combed its feathers and pointed at the road outside the door. Walk for 10 minutes and take the bus. Turn left at the next stop, and you'll be at the bank. Grab a ticket, and you'll have everything. Who doesn't know how to rob a bank? Weischer rolled his eyes. Don't you have any magic that can turn stone into gold? Magic. That's a long story, but I do know the technology to make gold. But what? Weischer leaned forward, his eyes shining. But the cost per gram is about 3,000 yuan in Dongxia currency, she said calmly. Pure gold made this way is usually used as a spiritual base material in all kinds of ceremonies and altars. If you want, I can get you 2 pounds. If I had money, why would I need gold? Weischer was speechless. He could only sit on the steps and continue to stare blankly until a faint shattering sound rang out waking him up. It was as if a glass bottle had been kicked and broken. In this hot summer afternoon, it was so crisp. Huaishir turned around in shock and looked in the direction of the front yard. "Someone's coming." Crow looked up thoughtfully and said worriedly, "Did they find out that I stole electricity from your house?" Huaishir was stunned at first. Then he came to his senses and glared at him. "When the hell did you do such a thing behind my back?" "Actually, I also secretly pulled out a network cable. The Wi-Fi signal is pretty good." Crow took out a smartphone from under its wing. "Do you need a password?" Huaishir glared at her and got up. She tiptoed to the back of the room and poked her head out. Crow skillfully stepped on his head and poked his head out as well. In the corner of the decaying courtyard, there was a person looking around sneakily, then reached out and pulled down his companion, who had climbed over the wall. Just like that, the two of them landed on the ground. Their arms were bulging, and their faces were still covered by masks. "Oh," Crow whispered, "do people who charge electricity still climb over walls these days?" "Probably thieves." Huaishir gritted his teeth and bent down to pick up half of an iron bar from the corner. "Anyway, this kind of thing has happened more than once." "Oh." She looked at Huaishir thoughtfully and then smiled strangely. "I hope so." Huaishir did not have time to pay attention to her. He lowered his voice and quietly peeped at the scene in front of him. The two burly men put on their gloves, looked around, and whispered something to each other. Then they tiptoed into the house through the broken window on the side. Huaishir carefully opened the back door of the house and heard the old floorboards creaking. The heavy footsteps first lingered in the living room, then went upstairs. The sound of the door being opened could be heard continuously. Soon, he heard voices upstairs. "He's not here. Let's look for him first and see where he hid it." Then there was a rummaging sound, and there was a constant sound of things being broken. Huaishir listened with a toothache. Originally, the house was already barren. His parents had pawned everything that was slightly valuable, and all that was left was a pair of worthless rotten furniture. It was not easy for these guys to survive for so long, but he did not expect to be in trouble today. Fortunately, although the house was barren, at least the house was big enough, and there were many empty rooms. It would take a long time, even if they searched. Huaishir took a deep breath, grabbed the stick, and tiptoed upstairs. He heard a rough sound coming from his bedroom. Bang! The sound of a drawer falling to the ground. "Damn it, my desk!" Then there was another crisp sound, and the things in the cabinet fell to the ground. Crash! The things on the desk lamp and the table also fell down. "Look at this." As if they had found something, Huaishir heard the sound of a zipper being pulled. It was the sound of the piano case being opened, followed by the dull echo of the piano body being hit. "Not in here. Could there be a mezzanine?" One of them guessed. "Break it open and see F*CK, your mother." Huaishir was furious. "I didn't care when you rummaged through the cabinets, and now you want to destroy my rice bowl. This is a big feud." With no time to hesitate, he poked his head out and saw the two people squatting on the ground with their backs to him. One of them had already picked up a hammer. Anger rose in his heart, and he became bold. He raised the stick and jumped down. He had a good plan here. First, he would stun one person, then, before the other person could react, he would hit again. Everything was done. Things went very smoothly. Bang! The man with the hammer fell to the ground, but right after that, Huaishir saw the iron pipe in her hand, which had been there for God knows how many years, break in the middle and fly out. He was stunned. The other person was also stunned. Then a fierce light flashed in his eyes, and he pounced on Huaishir. Huaishir subconsciously raised his leg and kicked him. Then he staggered, picked up the chair next to him, and threw it down. Then the broken chair that had been with him for so many years was also sacrificed. That person didn't seem to be in pain or itch. He finally got up from the ground and clenched his fists, making cracking sounds. His face under the mask also became ferocious. Huaisher took a step back at first, but then he reacted. Today was different. He was no longer the weak chicken who couldn't even truss a chicken. Good. This peerless martial arts skill will be displayed in your shop. He smiled coldly and went up to perform a set of military boxing. Then it was another set of military boxing, and finally another set of military boxing. The military boxing that he had learned through getting beaten up was indeed very easy to practice. He went from the first set to the third set without stopping. It was like moving clouds and flowing water, full of vigor and vigor. Except for the fact that the opponent didn't lose a single hair, there were no shortcomings. Huaisher was about to collapse from exhaustion, but he didn't even hit the person. If this was under the bridge, he might have earned 100 or so yuan as a tip, but it was useless now. The brawny man's movements were frighteningly agile. Although he didn't know any military boxing, the strength of his punches and kicks was frightening. With a casual punch, Huaisher's vision turned black, and his face swelled up. Damn, this guy is tough. I'll run. Huaisher just had this thought in his mind, but then he became angry. This is my F** king house. Even if someone is going to run, it's not me. Then he felt a chill at the back of his head and subconsciously lowered his head. Then he felt a hammer swinging at the back of his head. The wind whistled, and the guy behind Huaisher, who was knocked down by his rod, got up. That was why old steel rods were unreliable. Before Huaisher had time to reflect, he saw the man opposite him pounce on him. With a sudden hug, he was pressed to the ground. Then a big hand grabbed his neck. Kill this little F***er. Under the mask, the pair of eyes were full of viciousness. Damn, I almost capsized. The man holding the hammer gasped and walked up. He raised the hammer in his hand and aimed it at Suke's head. Karma really came fast. Just now, Huaisher was the one who hit someone, and now it was someone else's turn to hit him. Seeing that the hammer was being raised, he was so scared that he struggled hard, but he couldn't get rid of the hand on his neck. In the chaos, he could only tear off his mask, revealing his scarred face. F***ck. Help! Huaisher screamed. Think of something sad. Crow shouted at the top of his voice. Think about how you died in your dreams. How many times did you die? How tragically did you die? Huaisher suddenly felt a little tired. He was going to die. What was the use of thinking about that? Oh, and then he wouldn't be afraid if he was mentally prepared, right? He could also die peacefully. What a good idea. Thinking of the tragic deaths in his dreams, Huaisher felt a burst of grief and indignation. After personally experiencing death countless times, the terrifying weight of those memories almost made him breathless. The more he died, the more he was afraid of death, because death was such a terrible thing. At that moment, he felt a warm flow emerge from his right hand, and then there seemed to be something in his clenched fist. It was fine like sand, and it was full of sand. Without time to think, Huaisher subconsciously scattered those things. Pitch-black dust flew from his fingertips, and in an instant it pounced on the man's face. The hand that was strangling him loosened a little in the sudden attack. Huaisher suddenly opened his eyes, then suddenly rolled over, and heard a roar in his ear. The floor at the back of his head was smashed to pieces by the hammer. The loud noise made him break out in a cold sweat. But then, before he could get up, he saw the face of the person who was strangling him suddenly contorted. His face turned red, and he panted violently. Then he burst into tears. The person holding the hammer was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes turned red. F***ck. What the hell is this? Chili powder? In his shock, Weischer accidentally inhaled the black powder floating in the air that was quickly decomposing. Suddenly, a strong sour feeling spread from the tip of his nose. Be careful, that seems to be tribulation dust. You'll be in trouble if you get it on you. Crow's warning was always a step too late, and Weischer finally realized that the sour feeling at the tip of his nose did not seem to come from external stimulation, but it came from the pain and sadness in the depths of his heart. It seemed like he was fired by a garbage supervisor and lost his job for a living. It seemed like his little Shiba Inu that he raised from childhood was stolen. It seemed like one day he finished his overtime work early and went to his girlfriend's house to find another man lying in her bed. Chapter 11. Oh God, I'm so bitter. Weischer raised her head to the sky and let out a mournful scream. Then she began to bawl loudly as tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. At the same time, two hoarse wails rang out, unwilling to be outdone. One, Dad is sorry. Mom, your son is unfilial. I can't send you off. Under the terrifying effect of the tear gas, the two burly men who broke into the house cried until their snot and tears were about to flow out. While crying, the three of them looked at each other, as if they felt that the world was so cruel, but they were so lonely. At this moment, they couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for each other. No way. Even if their mother died, they lost their daughter, and they were unlucky for the rest of their lives. They still had to do the work they needed to do, and they still hadn't finished what they needed to do. After wiping away their tears and snot, the two burly men suddenly pounced on them, and the three of them wrestled together, like chickens pecking at each other. They cried, pulled each other's hair, slapped each other, kicked each other's lower body, and broke each other's pinky fingers. As they cried, Weischer really began to cry. It was too king painful. Motherf Ker, be gentler. He cried and gave the man a punch, covering his eyes. The scarred face with tears also lifted up and suddenly bit Weischer's arm. The other man took the opportunity to grab Weischer's hair, crying and punching him mindlessly. Old Six, kill him. The man who was being beaten up by Weischer screamed between crying and gasping for breath, kill him. Old Six behind Weischer cried and responded, then immediately punched the back of Weischer's head with all his strength, causing him to black out and fall to the ground. Ai Ching leaned against the wall with one hand on her crutch, the dust on the handrail, and the wall-rubbed gray marks on her white dress. In her other hand, she held a gun. Smoke faintly rose from the muzzle. You took the bait so quickly. She looked at the struggling man under Weischer and then stepped aside at the entrance of the stairs. Keep him alive. At the bottom of the stairs behind her, Yu Dongri walked up with a complicated expression. He took a deep look at Ai Ching next to him and couldn't help but feel a chill in the back of his molars. He didn't expect that Weischer had the confidence of Ai Ching. On the way here with Ai Ching, he finally figured out what was going on. Everyone thought that after attacking the police station, the culprit would disappear with the border relics and lay low for a while. But Ai Ching had a different opinion in her heart. The evidence was based on the newly discovered corpses from yesterday morning. Although they were equally tragic, there were traces of torture and abuse on them. They suffered a great deal of pain before they died. Under the cover of so many tragic deaths, this clue was passed over by most people. But looking at the other corpses, it could be seen that although the murderer's killing method was cruel, it was clean and neat, and he didn't waste time on irrelevant matters. Even if he had a strong desire for sadism, he wouldn't waste time in such a place. Sublimators weren't invincible, especially in such a harsh shelter like the present. Even if he had a high-level stigmata, he couldn't do whatever he wanted. If he left a clue and attracted the attention of the Astronomical Society, he would never have a good ending. But since he had already found what he wanted, why bother torturing others? Was there not enough corpses? Internal cleansing, eliminating dissidents, accountability, or were they two completely unrelated cases? Then, among the countless guesses, there might be a possibility that was close to the truth. They hadn't found what they wanted. In addition to the border relics in the box, they also lost something else. Therefore, even if they found the box, they would never give up. If so, then there might be one person among their next targets. The person who reported the case first found the box. Why sure, she only had such a useless card in her hand. How dare this woman play such a big card and call Sho-ha in front of everyone? What was more frightening was that she really played this card. Originally, Yu Dongri thought that Huaishur was let off lightly because Ai Qing was lenient for the sake of her childhood sweetheart. Now, it seemed that this woman really had no humanity at all. And thinking that his weakness was in the hands of such a person, Yu Dongri's heart became more and more cold. Now that Ai Qing had given the order, he didn't dare to find an excuse to slack off. He could only sigh, lift his hair, and raise his eyes to look at the two people who were crying and wrestling on the floor in front of him. Ward round. Take out your ID card. As early as when he began to act coquettishly, Huaishur had a bad feeling in his heart. At this moment, he was using the same trick again. There was no way he would fall for it. He immediately turned his head, and his eyes were as tight as possible. Even if he was beaten to death, he didn't want to be embarrassed like last time. And the man who didn't know anything about this raised his head in shock and looked over. In the darkness, with his eyes tightly closed, Huaishur actually heard a strange ho-ho sound, and the force that was pulling him suddenly loosened. The man seemed to be rolling on the ground. In a daze, Huaishur quietly opened his eyes and looked at the man on the ground. He only saw him staring blankly in the direction of the stairs behind Huaishur, as if he couldn't breathe, and kept scratching his throat. His face was blue and purple, but there was no despair in his expression. Instead, it was full of surprise and admiration. Oh my God, what kind of godly skill is this? Huaishur's heart was completely cold. The person laughed foolishly as he stared at Yu Dongri. Youngster, why are you so handsome? I really like you. As he spoke, white foam began to seep out of his mouth. He began to tremble violently. The chair that he was tied to began to creak sharply, as if the ropes were about to snap. Yu Dongri's expression changed. Immediately afterwards, everyone could hear a crisp sound coming from within his body. Crack, crack, crack. It sounded like the strings of a zither being snapped. However, Zhao Baoju's expression only grew more and more excited. I'm going to ascend to the heavens. He grinned and laughed loudly. Heavenly Father has come to pick me up. There are 72 angels who are just as handsome as you, coming to pick me up. In the midst of his hoarse cries, the person began to convulse violently. Green smoke began to emerge from his mouth and nose. Immediately afterwards, a raging fire quickly emerged, burning through his flesh and bones. It burned vigorously. In the blink of an eye, his entire body was incinerated. He turned into a pile of ash mixed with bone fragments. However, the ropes and chair that bound him were unharmed. There were only dark scorch marks on them. Hiss! Huaishur took a step back subconsciously. He was so frightened by this scene that his scalp went numb. Yu Dongri rubbed his face. He couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. The trail is broken again. However, Ai Qing's expression remained indifferent. After a long time, she finally spoke after a period of silence. Not necessarily. Yu Dongri was puzzled. However, he noticed that Ai Qing was looking at Huaishur. He's still alive. Ai Qing looked at the stunned Huaishur. Although I don't know why those people wanted to kill him. As long as this bait is here, I can always catch their traces. You want me to die? At this point, how could Huaishir not understand what she was planning? He immediately became furious. There's only half a month left until the summer vacation. I still need 4,000 yuan for my living expenses. I'm going to die either way. I might as well die of poverty. Is that so? Ai Ching interrupted him. She raised the thing in her hand and showed him the black barrel of the gun. Oh, is this all you've got? Although Huaishir was so scared that he desperately leaned back, he was still stubborn. Even if I, Huaishir, am shot to death by you today and jump down from here, I will never. Just as he was about to express his unyielding might, he saw Ai Ching raise another thing. It was her mobile phone. On the screen, the bank balance showed a long string of zeros that Huaishir couldn't count. Everyone for me. I'll do it for everyone. Huaishir patted his chest and said seriously and righteously, it's the duty of every citizen of Dongsha to cooperate with the investigation of the government. Please don't pity me, because I'm a delicate flower. Come on, Diwali, what do you like to play? If it weren't for that little girl's sharp eyes, how could she have been fine after you scattered the ashes? The crow rolled his eyes. Huaishir became even angrier when he heard this. What the hell is that thing? How did it get out of my hands? He had originally thought that he would awaken some kind of miraculous power when he was on the verge of death, but what he had awakened was a miraculous chili powder. Who could withstand that? How should I put it? By definition, it's a rare origin substance material. It's a high-purity essence extracted from large amounts of death and destruction. The crow pondered for a moment before replying, if you want me to explain how you were able to scatter this stuff, then it's probably because you read death records and used your own unique attribute to extract your fear of death. Then you added it to your own origin substance and synthesized it into high-purity calamity ash. However, this is not your soul's ability. It's a byproduct of your subconscious use of your own attribute. For example, it's probably the noise of a washing machine, the waste water from an air conditioner, or the radiation from an induction cooker. Can't you use a different adjective? Fine, then let's put it this way. Right now, you're probably a negative energy generator. It doesn't matter if you don't add the word probably. Huaishir was furious. He glared at him hatefully. Also, what kind of skill is this? Can't you help me get a better one? I want to, but... The crow shrugged. You know what walls can't be painted means, right? Huaishir glared at him hatefully for a long time. Then he quickly reacted. If that's the case, negative emotions can be extracted, then positive emotions can't be extracted, right? In other words, I can make fat otaku happy ashes at any time? Oh, you mean Dust of the Liberated? The crow nodded. That's right. However, the problem is, you have to have some happy memories, right? Bullshit. How can there be no happy memories? I'm so happy. Huaishir angrily slapped his chest. Do you know how happy my days were? I was happy from morning to night. When I woke up, I could continue to be happy. The crow didn't say anything. He just looked at him until Huaishir awkwardly turned his head away. Let's change the topic. Just like that, under the cruel reality, he accepted the fact that he had become a negative energy generator. Since someone is here, I'm afraid I have to hide for a while for safety reasons. I'm afraid you'll have to rely on yourself for what to do next. The crow heard footsteps coming from the back door and hurriedly said, in order to avoid being exposed, don't read the death records in the Book of Destiny when there are people around. Try meditating on your own. Meditating? Huaishir was stunned. How do I meditate? How do I meditate? Didn't I give you the Wi-Fi password? The crow unfolded his wings and flew into the distance, leaving only his last words. Check it out yourself. After a busy afternoon, he finally managed to deal with Yu Dongri's various strange needs. In the midst of all this, Huaishir even secretly used her phone to look up what meditation was. It took him 3 to 4 hours to flip through 100,000 advertisements and various strange religious propaganda materials. Finally, he found a relatively reliable explanation in a foreign encyclopedia. In layman's terms, there were many types of meditation. The more advanced methods were very complicated. First, find a quiet place, preferably with a cool breeze, a bright moon hanging high in the sky, a bamboo forest, or by a river. Then take a bath and change clothes, fast for 3 days, burn incense, and so on. But if it was a lower-level meditation, it was extremely simple. Find a comfortable place to lie down, close your eyes, and empty your mind. Although it sounded a little ridiculous, at least there wouldn't be any problems with this method. At most, you would just accidentally fall asleep. If he blindly came up with some strange method, endocrine imbalance would be the least of it, but he would be on the road to schizophrenia. In a website cited in the encyclopedia, Huaishir saw a summary of the nature of meditation in a British metaphysics Nord's blog. After leaving the background of mysticism, for ordinary people, meditation was a way to relax the nerves and the brain. By emptying one's mind and entering a deep dormant state, one would allow the overloaded internal organs and nervous system to have space to rest and repair themselves. Therefore, it wasn't limited to meditation, penance, chanting sutras, or taking drugs. As long as one could enter a state of relaxation and emptiness, one could do anything. The blogger also recommended the methods he had personally tried in his blog and listed out the pros and cons, including writing. The cons were that it was easy to enter a state of anxiety after getting stuck. If someone found out that you had used your name as the main character to write, "Goblins are not fish in the pool," you would welcome social death from its rapid spread. Playing the piano. The cons were that it was difficult to get started, and it was easy to disturb people. The blogger chose to give up after being beaten up by his neighbor for the 3rd time. Finally, the blogger came to a conclusion. Painting was still better. In his last blog post, he mentioned that not only did he empty himself and enter a state of meditation, but he also heard the whispers of the ancient souls that had returned from the 7th dimension in his ears and dreams, narrating the truth of all living things. This allowed him to gain enlightenment and liberation. At the end of the post, he also posted his latest work after his painting skills had improved by leaps and bounds. The abundant emotions that emerged from the bottom of his heart for some reason merged into the low melody with the movements of his fingers and the strings. Like a river rushing into a surging sea, it shook his consciousness and carried him to a distant place. "Oh, my God, have I leveled up?" There was no time to click his tongue and be excited. Huaishir didn't even have the time to feel joy and excitement. He had been attracted by his own melody and involuntarily became intoxicated in the sad and low sound of the instrument. He seemed to have fallen asleep again. But in the dream, there was no death and fear that had been entangling him. In the silent darkness, he felt as if he was sinking in water, full of silence and serenity. When he tried to open his eyes, it was a blur in front of him. He couldn't see clearly. He could only vaguely glimpse the light in the distance, with ripples like a tide. And when he tried to move his hands and feet, the darkness seemed to break open, and he returned to the empty hall. He was suspended in the air. When Huaishir lowered his head, he saw himself playing in a trance. It was as if his whole person had been divided into two. One was his physical self intoxicated in the performance, but the spiritual self seemed to ride the melody, breaking free from the shackles of the body and flying in the air. Suddenly, he discovered that Yu Dongri had left the hall at some point. He curiously wandered around and discovered that he could actually pass through the walls like a ghost. He could move freely, but he couldn't leave the stone essence building's surroundings. It was as if he had been imprisoned in the middle of an invisible wall. This is a form of protection. Why, sure. Don't misunderstand. The illusory crow stood on a branch outside the wall and looked at him, as if she could see through his thoughts. Separating origin substances is an extremely dangerous activity. If you didn't have the stone essence building's protection, you would probably be like a candle in the darkness right now, being targeted by something. As she spoke, she flapped her wings, pushing Huaisher back down the wall. A friendly reminder: before you reach the peak of the Mercury rank, don't try this anywhere else. It was as if he were drunk or dreaming. Huaisher didn't even hear what she was saying. He floated around like a leaf, swaying as he wandered around the stone essence building. Soon, he found the sneaky Yudongri in the washroom on the 3rd floor. Taking advantage of the fact that Huaisher wasn't paying attention while playing the zither, he secretly ran to the washroom on the 3rd floor. He locked the door and carefully looked around. After making sure that no one was paying attention, he reached out and took out a bottle from his bag. Huaisher's heart suddenly jumped. What was he trying to do?